I am the Texan counselor, and some issues have been coming up that I think as a Texan and a counselor and a Texan counselor, I have some viewpoints on. In the light of last mass shooting, this comes up every now and then, but it's come up again, so I thought I'd discuss it this time. After every mass shooting, someone talks about how people with mental illnesses should not be allowed to have guns. The thought is similar to people on the no-fly list shouldn't have any guns, but I believe that was declared unconstitutional. Partly because you can get on a no-fly list for anything, and you don't even know that you're on it until someone pulls you off, or until you try and get on an airplane and they won't let you on. And then getting yourself off of a no-fly list was a major pain in the ass. In fact, we should probably just do it the no-fly list. It just doesn't work anyway. But this latest round is this idea that anyone who has ever had a mental illness shouldn't be allowed to buy a gun. So there's a few points to this. One, who's going to keep track of that? Is the federal government really going to keep track of everyone with a mental illness? And then every gun owner, every gun seller is going to have to then check that list. And then what? So they don't, And then the next part is what constitutes a mental illness? And I think this is the most important piece of the puzzle. A mental illness is technically anything that can be diagnosed in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, which is what psychiatrists and counselors and social workers and a lot of us use to diagnose folks. They have made those definitions so broad that I can probably pull just about anyone off the street and probably give them a diagnosis for even just mild depression. Adjustment disorder. Adjustment disorder means in the past 6 months, something has happened to you, some change has happened in your life, and that is making the rest of your life difficult. So anyone who's starting school, anyone who's starting a new job, anyone who's gotten married, anyone who's having a baby, anything that's even good that might have some sort of disruption, like maybe you're a little nervous about going to class, or you're stressed out about moving in with this new love of your life, I could give you adjustment disorder for that. Depression, super easy. Really, any kind of drug and alcohol, actually that's a little harder. But I think even grief has been now made a diagnosable illness. Anyway, I'm going to have a whole nother rant on the DSM and its fallacies. But what that means is that anyone with even the most mild mental illness could be put on this list and therefore would not be allowed to buy a gun. I guess ever. I haven't heard anyone talk about, like, when do you get off this list? And how do you get on this list, first of all? Because there's all these HIPAA violations, really. I mean, HIPAA regulations, right? So if you were my client, if you were to come in and want to seek out counseling, due to HIPAA, I cannot tell anyone that you're seeing me for counseling. I can't tell them anything that we've said. I can't tell that person anything unless you've signed a release of information. But buried within your within your insurance policy is a release. So if you want to see a counselor and you want to use your insurance, and remember, according to Obamacare, everyone has to have insurance. So if you want to use your insurance, then I have to give you a diagnosis, and that has to go to the insurance companies. And then that will be how the federal government can get around it and find out who's been naughty and who's been nice. But then again, like I said, what's the statute of limitations? If you were depressed when you went off to college, you got really homesick, you met a girl, you broke up with that girl, you were really depressed, and you went to go see a counselor, you used your parents' insurance, you would have a mental illness. 20 years later, that's still out there. Insurance companies, they don't purge these records. That's still out there. So 20 years later, you want to buy a gun, and they say, well, we can't sell it to you because you're depressed. Well, I'm not depressed. I'm fine. Oh, you mean that thing that happened to me in college? Yeah, that thing. Well, too bad. Now you can't buy a gun. Unless you want to go get certified that you're not depressed anymore. And that's the thing that's going to happen. Is they're going to turn counselors like me into these police officers that then have to go certify that this person is now mentally well enough to own a gun. Most counselors won't sign that because that's what will happen. Someone will buy a gun because they're not depressed. 2 weeks later, their wife divorces them, and then they kill themselves. And then as a counselor, I get sued because I said he was fine. Because actually, when I saw him, he was fine. See, that's the thing, is that mental illness is not a nice black and white, easy answer. It's very gray, and it comes and goes. And it could be really bad years ago, and then be perfectly fine, and then be really bad again. Who really knows? The other notion, too, and this is what I really hate, is the chilling effect that this is going to have. As it is, I have a hard time getting clients in for counseling. The clients that really need to come into counseling. My client of choice, so to speak, is a man that you would never think of being in counseling. When I went off to college, I had in my head that would be the sort of counselor that my dad would go see. A former Marine, Vietnam veteran, hunts, fishes, rides motorcycles, works on computers. Not the sort of guy you would ever think of in counseling. That's the guy that I want in my office. That's the sort of guys I want to serve. And those guys already have enough barriers to going into counseling in the first place. For one, they think it's not for them. They think they're going to be in an office with a woman or a very effeminate man, and they're going to have to talk about their feelings. And they're going to have to cry and all this other stuff. And I'm sad to say, for the most part, they're correct. That doesn't mean all counselors are like that or all counseling experiences are like that. But it's kind of common. And even in Texas, that's still a fairly common notion. So if these guys are now being told, well, if you go see a counselor, your name's going to go on a list, and then you can't ever buy a gun again, ever. These guys won't go into counseling. They would rather not. Especially if, their mental health has nothing to do with it. What if their problem is they're anxious? What if their problem is they're afraid of public speaking, and they go into counseling to help them deal with their anxiety, to deal with public speaking, because now they have a job where they're going to have to go off and give presentations? Why should that guy not be allowed to buy a gun? He's anxious about public speaking. It's one of the most common fears out there. And counselors all the time deal with phobias and traumas from old past, and has no bearing on the present, or at least shouldn't have any bearing on whether or not someone owns a hunting rifle or a pistol or even an AR-15. So this whole notion of we're going to have a list for mental health is not going to work. It's one where you're going to see is a lot of guys just won't go into mental health. They won't go into counseling. Or what they'll do, they'll go into counseling, but they won't use their insurance. They'll just pay out of pocket, because then there's no record. If a client, and I've had a few clients do this, they have come into counseling and paid me out of pocket, specifically because they did not want to use their insurance, because they knew I'd have to give them a diagnosis, and they did not want that out there on their record. That's true for a lot of veterans. It's true for a lot of military personnel still. That in police, I suppose even some doctors, some other careers out there, they do not want a record that they've ever had mental health counseling. It's stupid, and I disagree with the logic, but that's the world that we live in which some fields look down on someone for going to get help. So basically, my point is, don't do it. This isn't going to work. It's actually going to be abused, and I really know what it is the people who are coming up with this idea, they already understand all the concerns I just mentioned. What they're going for is they don't want people to have guns. And the fewer people they can get to own guns, the better. And so what they're going to do is try and come up with these huge blanket sort of lists of people who should not be allowed to buy guns, and therefore very, very fewer guns will be out there. And again, like I've said in other videos, this isn't going to work. As it stands right now, there are more guns in America than there are Americans. And people will just buy and sell behind closed doors, do little straw purchases, Craigslist ads and whatever, and no one's going to be able to track this stuff. Go to a gun show, you can buy whatever you want. So I think, again, what we're seeing is this overreaction to a singular event, very unfortunate event. But I think what's much more telling is, one, why wasn't any of the mental health professionals catching this? Apparently this kid had been sick for a very long time. I still can't find anywhere where he ever received any kind of mental health treatment or was even on psychiatric meds. A lot of other people are talking about how psych meds make people go crazy. This is also stupid. I may have another video on that one later. But also, we're seeing where law enforcement broke down multiple times. I think I saw one where they said there was an armed police officer on campus and he didn't enter the building. I think another one said there was 4 or 5 armed police officers who did not enter the building. The FBI was warned a month before the shooting that this kid was going to be a shooter, and they did nothing with it. So I think a lot of this is authorities trying to hide the fact that they fucked up. And this kid fell through the cracks, and he ended up with AR-15 and shooting up about, I think, 17, 18 different people. Well, that's how many people died. Who knows how many people were actually injured. So anyway, that's all I have for now, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.